Diplodocus needs your help. Hey guys, welcome back to the Prehistoric Life Podcast. I'm your host, Eric Crawford, and today, as you can see, we got a lot of people here. Would y'all like to go through and introduce yourselves?
Emmanuel, you're in the middle on the top there, so.
Okay. Well, yeah, I'm Emmanuel Chop. I'm a paleontologist, as you probably realize. I've done a lot of work on diplodocids, flagellocaudatans, John might say, for some of them. Yeah, and I guess we are here to talk about this group tonight here in Europe, in Germany.
I'm John Whitlock. I'm also a paleontologist. I'm associate professor, hopefully next month or two, full professor at Mount Aloysius College, research associate at Carnegie Museum of Natural History. I think I'm the old fart in the group. I got started early. Started off with a lot of big sort of focus on phylogenetics, transitioned later into paleoecology, ecomorphology, stuff like that. And lately, kind of against my will, I've been dragged into working on dicreosaurids instead of diplodocids, or as Emmanuel might say, some of them are diplodocids. Yet to be determined on some of that.
I'm Colin Boisvert. I'm a PhD student at the Oklahoma State University Center for Health Sciences. Currently working on theropods while I'm here, but I did my master's on biomechanics regarding an hepatosaurine, and I've published a couple papers now on Haplocanthosaurus, which is an exciting animal, and excited to be here.
And I'm Tom van der Linden, and I'm a very, very, very soon to be PhD student at the Vrije Universiteit in Berlin, Germany. And my work also primarily revolves around sauropods, although I do also a lot of work on dinosaur reproductive systems.
So, this has been this Diplodocus problem council has been summoned. What is going on here? What we got going on?
Well, it's been a few years now that I was contacted by several people to actually work with them on different skeletons, new skeletons of diplodocoids, mostly diplodocids. And they all contacted me because they wanted to, at least in parts, use a phylogeny I created based on earlier phylogenies by John and some of my own work. And I figured it doesn't really make a lot of sense to crank out all these different analyses with basically the same matrix, but a different set of animals in the matrix. So I reached out to all of them and asked them if they would be fine with kind of working together on one phylogeny, combining all this, and produce a special volume on diplodocoids with descriptive papers, with a new phylogeny. Yeah, and so the group that is here now, they actually already have contributed, all of them, to this volume. A couple of papers are already published, and several others are either, I guess, in press already, John, right? or in review with Colin and with Carrie, and some more will be submitted soon. But the thing is, such a special volume is not coming for free. It's a lot of work also on the side of the journals. And even though we chose a journal that is usually for free for authors, Paleontologia Electronica, the amount of additional work we give them as a special volume obviously also comes with additional efforts from their side. So we wanted to support them with a fair amount of money in the sense that for the amount of papers we give them to work on, it's actually not a lot of money for a journal. It's $3,000 that they ask for up to 20 papers that could be part of this special volume. And to cover this, we have set up a crowdfunding campaign where we hope to gather the 3,000 over the next, I think, 3 weeks are missing. So that's basically the history of this and why we're here today.
So, what is the overarching research about? What is this? What is the research?
The papers are mostly, or the papers we are looking for the special volume are mostly descriptive papers of new specimens, potentially new species, and then the new phylogeny. Yeah, and some papers basing on the phylogeny, like a biogeography paper that Colin has been working on, and potentially some others that will come up.
And why is this research important? What does it do for paleo?
I'll stop talking for now.
So when I got started in the early 2000s, sauropods were largely not a thing that anyone really worked on. It had been since 1990 when Jack McIntosh published his phylogeny of the group in the first edition of the Dinosauria, since anyone had attempted to look at the group as a whole, really, honestly, holistically at all. And there had been scattered analyses associated with like new papers and things like that, but really nothing kind of on a broad scale, to the point where, like say in the 2007 Mesosaurus paper, that was the first time that there had ever been a fully, not really fully, but it largely fully realized Rebbachiosaurid phylogeny, period. And starting in the early 90s in Argentina and kind of scaling up into the rest of the world from there, there was this kind of push forward for a lot of folks finding Diplodocoids, new specimens. The number of taxa in the group really began to kind of explode in the early 2000s. And at that time, nobody was really focused on them in terms of like working on them specifically. It was Ali Raoui, Jorge Calvo, Leo Salgado, me, and like Jerry Harris were really the only people that were really focused on thinking about the group. And since then, there's been a huge explosion in interest in the group. A lot of people are working in the group now. Folks have taken the stuff that we did in the early days and run with it and done pretty incredible stuff with it. And it kind of feels like, to me anyway, that this is a point in time where a lot of this research is kind of coming to a head, where we've got this huge mountain of information about this widespread, ecologically very important group across, a large time range, that if we can come together and kind of put together a synthesis of kind of modern understanding of how the group works and how they behaved and how they related to each other, that it would be a nice springboard for a lot of other taxonomic groups. We talk about a lot of really important ecosystems in here. Obviously, we think about the Morrison, we think about Tendaguru, we think about a handful of different places in Argentina, obviously Northern Africa, lots of Western Europe. So there's lots of places that are touched by these animals that played massive roles in those ecosystems. That, again, just trying to get some baseline consensus on how these things worked is a huge thing, not only for our group, but also potentially for people who work on other taxonomic groups as well.
And I mean, it's just a lot. I mean, there's just a lot going on there with that specific group. Like, why? Like, what would the possibilities come from? Like, what possibilities could exchange from this?
Well, I know right now, so, and Carrie's not here right now, but we've been talking a little bit. There's been a resurgence in looking at large-scale ecological relationships in some of the better studied formations around the world. Particularly, if you think about the Morrison, there's a Morrison symposium right now, another volume coming out on those. In 2015, we had a Morrison symposium at SVP. At that time, I had done a large with an undergraduate, a large-scale ecological web, basically built out of the information we had at that time, which has exploded even in that 10 years. And I think kind of there's this push towards holistic understandings of ecosystems. We've done a lot and will continue to do a lot of this kind of alpha taxonomy, where we go out, we find a new thing, we name it, and we kind of brush our hands of it. But I think now we are, as a science, are kind of catching up to at least dinosaur paleontology. It's been true for mammal paleontology for a while. I think we as a science are kind of moving into that more holistic study kind of stuff. Again, trying to understand entire ecosystems, trying to understand, interactions and species interactions and things like that. And having kind of an understanding of some of the major herbivores in an ecosystem is kind of the starting point for understanding how ecosystems work. And in particular, in Tendaguru, in the Morrison, these were dominant members of that herbivore group. There were obviously smaller herbivores present, but there were also smaller sauropod herbivore present at the same time. So again, they kind of, at least to me anyway, are the fundament upon which our understanding of those ecosystems is going to fall forward from.
And what is this campaign? Like, what is the campaign for? What does it do?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that one. So experiment.com is a crowdfunding website for scientific research and scientific experiments. And what's already really cool is if you look in the different categories of projects you can explore, they have their own category for paleontology, and a bunch of other paleontologists have had different projects and research funded on this website. And so when we were thinking of how we were going to pay the APC, the article processing charge, that amount of money that the journal is charging to publish all of these papers in the special volume as part of the work they're doing for it, we thought about that we could put an experiment.com campaign together to basically get the word out that, hey, we're publishing a bunch of amazing open access papers so that anybody with an internet connection can read these papers, can check them out, can hopefully become inspired to be the next round of Diplodocoid researchers. And that if we put this out there, that, we needed help from the public to help raise money in order to pay this APC, that, right, people would come out and help support our research with getting these papers published. And that, of course, we would, be very grateful, very thankful for everyone's help. And we'd be able to return the favor. We have discussed, putting, right, everyone who donates their names into the volume in the acknowledgement section to thank them for their work. But This idea came about with the idea that we could crowdfund to pay for the APC for the special volume.
And how can people get involved?
They can go to experiment.com, donate to our cause, and to help us buy off the APCs. And at the same time, if they are not able to, just spread the word. That is already a major help for us, because paleontology as a science is not as big as, like, say, physics or medicine. So our field is slightly smaller. So it's already great if we can spread the word and get to people who are, let's say, wealthy enough to give us a couple of bucks for the APCs.
But even donating $20, helps. $5 helps, or just sharing the campaign so that more people see it is really helpful. We're actually we have 25 days left in our campaign, so we're 5 days in, and we've already raised $2 of the $3,000 needed to pay the APC, which is really exciting. So we just have $1,000 to go. So we're closing in, and with experiment.com, it's all or it's nothing. So either we hit our goal and we get all the money, or if we don't hit our goal, we don't get any of the money. So we are pushing to keep going and hit that 3K. And if we do get over $3,000, I guess Emmanuel or Shop, what do you guys want to talk about? I guess stretch goals.
Yeah, sure. So the plan is if we get more than 3,000, then we'll hire paleo artists to produce reconstructions or drawings or whatever for the different papers in the journal or in the special volume. So the money above the 3,000 is not wasted. It's actually going to paleo artists who often also do a lot of work, actually quite often for free for researchers. So it's going to be good to also be able to pay something to them for their work.
And you keep saying APC. Can you explain what an APC is and why it's needed?
Tom, you want to take that one? Or, I can.
Go ahead, Colin.
Okay. APC stands for Article Processing Charge. A lot of different journals charge money to the authors in order to cover costs when when publishing papers. And so different journals have different APCs that they charge. Paleontological Electronica normally doesn't have an APC for authors, but they're charging one for the special volume because they're putting in extra work with handling these papers and getting them all published as part of the special volume for Paleontological Electronica. Therefore, for the whole volume, like Emmanuel said, for up to 20 papers, they're charging us an APC of $3,000.
Yeah, just to put that into context a little bit, maybe some other journals, also open access journals, they actually ask for more than $3,000 for a single paper. So yeah, those 3,000 are really not a lot for up to 20 papers. But obviously, we have several contributions who are led by students like Colin or Tom, who might not have the money right there to pay for a part of that APC. So whatever is pledged and during the campaign is also supporting students in their work.
Why is, I mean, that's a very, very good thing, but why is open access important for this project, this specific project?
I think open access in general is quite important, as it enables science to reach the public as well as the scientific community in an easier way. Because for most journals, you have to pay to actually read the contributions that are in the journal, so the papers, essentially. Whereas in open access journals, and when published open access, everyone can read it. Whoever you are, wherever you are, just as long as you have a decent internet connection. And so free and open science is, I think, something that we're all striving for. as otherwise science is just gatekept behind strong walls that the journal puts up that often students cannot pay for. So
And how does how can you go into how that like open access benefits science better?
But for just in general purposes, like for example, a lot of depending on like the government grants that you get here in the States, Argentina, a couple of, obviously in Europe, you're required, if you receive public dollars for like tax dollars for doing it, you're required to have them published as open access. The idea being there that the people that are paying for the science, ostensibly taxpayers, should have access to it. The reality is that a lot of science, especially now for reasons, at least here stateside, is not publicly funded anymore, especially paleontology. And so folks that are getting, soft money grants from here or there or paying for it out of pocket, having that APC on top of everything else is just not something that's feasible. So a lot of papers get published behind journal paywalls. And so even in many cases, like, actual scientists still don't have access to those papers, and we have to kind of, do like a early 90s, late 80s tape trading kind of thing where we call each other up. And that doesn't do anybody any good. The harder it is to access science, the less likely you are to read it, obviously, number one, but also to have faith in it, to trust in it. And that's a really big problem today, especially not just here, but everywhere. And so being able to be upfront, being able to have anybody, literally anybody out there, be able to read and follow the methodology that we've done, or that whoever has written the paper has done, and to see how science is actually done, to see how the sausage is made to some extent, not just reading it on a SciComm website, but say, these are the things that went into doing this. These are the actual thought processes behind this, is invaluable from, their perspective of being a scientist and wanting there to be more scientists, or at least people who believe that what we do is like real,
And also the first two papers of this volume are already out, and people can go either to the Paleontological Electronica website, or they can go to the campaign website, and down below we have the first two papers that people are able to click, read, download, check out, and already see some of the cool stuff that Tom is actually first author on both of those papers, but the second paper, I think Emmanuel, Dr. Whitlock, and Tom are all on, which was just an introduction to the whole group Diplodocoidea. And it's a really, really cool paper that is really thorough, and it's going to be really important for years to come when people want to talk generally or more specifically about Diplodocoids.
And I'll get one of y'all to send me the link so I can put it in the bio.
I put the link actually in the chat. So
Oh, perfect. Beautiful. And I'll put that in the description down below for anybody that just wants to go down there, because you're already watching this to make it easier for y'all. But that's enough technical jargon. Let's talk about the actual research. What's the coolest and most surprising thing you've learned about Diplodocoids?
I have to couch my answer in the company that we're in. No, I'm kidding. It's fun when you get a sizable group of people that are all working on similar problems, because you can see how you can all look at the same material and come to different answers, and be able to look and follow the logic of those different answers, and hopefully, the idea is always that, you can have a debate about who's more correct, or less wrong, maybe is a better way to put it. And for this particular working group, one of the things that I love about that is that we have that, there's never been a situation where there's been this sort of weird proprietariness to our data. we've always been people that have shared a lot of stuff back and forth. And for me, like that collegiality is not necessarily something that's always true in other groups. So it's maybe less about the actual animals and more about kind of the people that we have working on them. That's been an extremely pleasant surprise.
Anybody else
Yeah,
want to?
I'm going to echo those words. I'm also was very pleasantly surprised by the enthusiastic response of all the researchers within that work on diplodocoids in general. Also from like South America and the people who are working on the Tendaguru material. So yeah, like John said, it's not really something that surprised me really about the animals anymore, because you research them so much that very little anatomical traits or whatever surprise you these days, given that sauropod diversity is already high to begin with. But yeah, it's just great that we have a lot of sort of camaraderie, and while having disagreements, that we can still go forward with those disagreements and not like hold the entire field of study, which can and does occasionally happen in other groups. So
Yeah, I think what's pretty amazing about diplodocids or diplodocoids more generally is that it is an extremely well-studied group, but there are still lots of questions that remain open. Like it's still not really clear what those guys ate, and how they ate exactly. So yeah, the more specimens we find, the more specimens we describe. The well, I guess some of these questions can be solved, but new questions arise also, and it's just I guess like this everywhere in science, but especially I think when you get into the diplodocoids as a new researcher, you might think everything is already known, but then if you actually dig into it, we still know quite like little about these animals, of how they actually lived.
Yeah, and to echo what Emmanuel was saying, I'm leading a paper on the biogeographical aspect of Diplodocoidea, and it's funny how many questions are arising from that research of just, oh wow, we still have so much we need to find out and so much to learn. Especially, for instance, I think one of the key questions, which I have a feeling once I say it, everyone here is going to smile, is what is happening with diplodocoids in the Middle Jurassic? It seems the Middle Jurassic is a very important time, because we know once we get to the Late Jurassic, we have a huge explosion in the number of species, especially in the Morrison Formation. And then you can even get into, all right, are they going from Europe to North America to Europe, or are they going back and forth? But so the Middle Jurassic is this key time that's going to require a lot of future study and continued study, as it is already heavily studied when it comes to diplodocoids. What is going on with this group? How are they evolving? How are they diversifying and spreading across the globe? And so there's a lot of great future research that can be done, that will be done, that I am looking forward to reading. So.
And how do you reconstruct the life of an animal that big with so little soft tissue, like preserved?
Well, I mean, there's lots of things that we can do. For example, in terms of, just looking at kind of what Emmanuel brought up, diet and things like that. Whenever you have a muscle, there's always going to be a scar or a mark left behind on the bones. So we can look at, and there's been nothing I've done, but lots of people that are really like maybe smarter than I am have done, including one of the authors on one of our studies here, a former grad student of mine, JP Garderes, looking at musculature, particularly jaw musculature, using those marks. Even if we don't have the muscles themselves remaining, we can reconstruct jaw action, potential motions of those jaws, things like that. We can look at microwear and macrowear of teeth. We can pull information from modern ecology and look at it's called ecomorphology, which is the shape of how a body interacts with the environment. So we can look at snout shape. We can look at footprints, and look at pedal morphology from that. Lots of things that we can do that don't require the actual soft tissue remaining to put together a picture of, not only just, what an animal might have been eating for breakfast that morning, but like over the course of years of their lives, where were they doing it? How were they doing it? Were they, solitary? Were they pack animals? Things like that. Lots and lots of information that's out there that can be just pulled by reading the bones and by looking at trace fossils like footprints.
Yeah, the more you study the bones, and also like bones that have been dug out 100 years ago or more, the more you study them with new methods, also with every new question, new method you apply to these bones, you get some more information out. And then it's just, it's a matter, it's still very difficult, but it's a matter of just combining all these puzzle pieces into the image.
30 years ago, destructive sampling, histology, looking at tissue, under a slide was unheard of. Now it's really common. 25 years ago, using CT imaging to look at things without destructively sampling them, neuroanatomy and stuff like that was unheard of. And, Larry Whitmer really pioneered that. Now it's a really common thing. So it's like Emmanuel said, we are continually able to bring in new tech or steal whole cloth techniques from other fields and bring them into our field and add that. And then we add on top of that the fact that, again, even 20 years ago, there were maybe half as many taxa in the group as we have now. We have so many new specimens, so many new taxa, just so much more data now that enables us to do things like piece together puzzle pieces that are from incomplete things that we may not have been able to do in the past.
And what makes a diplodocid a diplodocid? What separates it from all of the other sauropods?
You're just cooler.
They are cooler.
They were innovators. When we look at tooth shape, for example, in sauropods, one of the things that we see is that we start off kind of leaf-shaped or broad-crowned, and these most diplodocoids kind of went their own direction and got these really narrow cylindrical teeth very early on in the process, while their other members of the group, things like titanosauriforms and other macronarians, were stuck with the broad crowns. And then when they went away, basically as soon as they really became less numerous, we saw titanosaurs immediately copy skull morphology, tooth morphology. And so they, diplodocoids were doing it first. They were the original hipsters, I guess, on this one. And so understanding what they were doing, right, is again something that we know it worked once because they were widespread and they were common for a huge chunk of the Jurassic and early Cretaceous. And then we know that when they became less dominant, somebody else immediately picked up the same stick and ran with it. So whatever they were doing was really successful, and really a good way to be a sauropod, basically.
And within that, what's the biggest misconception about the diplodocids?
It's maybe a better answer for the general public.
I'm tempted to say branch stripping, just because my own research.
Yeah.
For a long time, sauropod feeding and diplodocoid feeding is still a somewhat of a mystery, like Emmanuel alluded to earlier. But one of the things that has been a long-running historical theme with Diplodocus especially is because the skull is weird, because the teeth are weird, there seemed like there had to be a correspondingly weird way of eating that went with that. And so we get in the the early parts of the 20th century scraping algae off of rocks, or eating bivalves, or raking up aquatic vegetation off the ground. And then we get into things like branch stripping, which is, a plausible hypothesis on some level. But there's really not any evidence for it, and there's a significant amount of evidence against it. And if you don't take my word for it, it was on Dinosaur Train too. So, and if Dinosaur Train gives it a pass, I feel like I did right on that one. Ken's got my back on that one. But that's my biggest one. Maybe aquatic behavior. They weren't really aquatic.
Yeah.
I would personally say, I think this is getting better now, but I think maybe an older misconception could be people would assume that Diplodocoids, we don't really talk about them or think of them as post-late Jurassic creatures, but now we're starting to find a lot more of them in the early Cretaceous and potentially even early late Cretaceous. So this is a group that, like Dr. Whitlock was saying, persisted for a long period of time, right? They were very successful, and so they weren't just here in the Jurassic, especially the late Jurassic, and then gone. No, they stuck around. As for maybe not a misconception, but a debate, and I did my master's relating to this, with specific Diplodocoids, you can start to ask questions and think about, all right, what was the neck posture like for these animals, and maybe specific ones, and right, are they feeding high in the trees, low on the ground, somewhere in between? But that gets almost into a specific taxon by taxon basis. So I at least personally don't know if we can say right now all Diplodocoids had X neck posture, or a certain neck posture when it comes to where they were feeding and what they were feeding on. And that is a complex process that will involve, discussions and work on the skull, teeth microwear, neck posture, and other factors as well.
So within the I guess the idea that they were only late Jurassic, can you give some of those post-Jurassic examples? Could you give a few examples of those?
Well, most of the Creosaurids and all except possibly one Rebbachiosaurid are all Cretaceous. So, like, if we very rudely split the entire group of Diplodocoidea in half, then half only exists in the Cretaceous and the other half only comes from the Jurassic, with only one putative, reasonably accepted the Creosaurid being from the Middle Jurassic, and the rest being all Cretaceous critters that dominate both the northern and southern hemisphere.
Well, there is one brachytracheopan, but when we look at the time there, it's a very clearly a push towards diversity in the Cretaceous for a lot of these animals. Whereas Diplodocids, like I said, like Tom said, basically go away.
And we touched on those debates, or we touched on them briefly with like the neck posture. What are some of those major debates within the field of Diplodocids, and where do y'all stand with them? Some drama, guys.
I think for one of the things, and Colin got into this too, when we talk about, say, habitual head posture or neck posture, it's important to understand that these are not the only conditions that these animals were ever spending their time in. And it's getting better, I think, with a lot of what Colin is doing and some other folks, where we're not saying, well, this is the posture, like this is their range of postures, this is the things we know that they could have done, what behaviors they were doing, during that span. Like, we know all sauropods had to have been able to bring their neck down to ground level so they could drink, right? We know that was possible. Is that habitual posture? Probably not, right? We know a lot of things that are kind of within a realm of possibilities. And I think a lot of those kinds of fights are largely outside of paleontologists, and they're more kind of in the what the word I'm looking for is, enthusiast group. I don't know if that's that. I don't mean that like in a bad way. We love paleontology enthusiasts, But kind of outside of the realm of research, I think those debates take a much stronger role than they do for us. I don't think we get into fist fights or anything anymore. It's been years.
Or I
Is
mean,
that the reason why you're not coming to SVP? You're afraid of us. Well, I'm not going either. So,
or I mean, there are some debates right now within the taxonomy and systematics of Diplodocoidea, such as, all right, if we look at the very base of the tree, where does Haplocanthosaurus fall? You know, currently Haplocanthosaurus is considered a basal diplodocoid, but its position within just Sauropoda has shifted a bunch in the last 20 years. And then even in our more derived clades, right, very recently, the Shop It All 2015 paper resurrected the genus Brontosaurus, where for 100 years people have been going back and forth of, was Brontosaurus a valid genus, or was it all 5 species of Apatosaurus? And so there are questions within that taxonomy, and these are still questions that we're constantly asking. So, you know, these are areas of study both in this special volume and just in general.
And what about like the debate on tail use, that kind of thing? Because that's a big one for maybe not all Diplodokids, but Apatosaurus and Brontosaurus.
well, yeah, they have these whiplash tails. They're called. There's even the group of Flagellicaudata, which combines Dicraeosaurids and Diplodocids, and Flagellicaudata means whiplash tails. And these long tails are weird. So there have been lots of different hypotheses of how they were used, including as a whiplash, as a weapon, defensive weapon. There were suggestions of the tail tip actually reaching above the speed of sound, and doing the bullwhip cracking. And there were suggestions of the tail being a help in communication between individuals in a herd, because he was moving from one individual to the other, so you would know where the other ones are, even if they are behind you. The thing with these functions is, like with stegosaur plates, for example, they most likely don't have a single function, and it's most often a combination of things that parts of your body do. And it's very difficult to actually rule out things completely. There was a student of mine, Simone Conti, a PhD student. He has done a recent restudy of the tail motion, to basically check that claim of the bullwhip cracking sound. And with that model that he created, the speed was actually much lower than what would you need for a cracking sound. What was still the case was that the tip was still like pretty fast. So actually the student compared it to a golf ball hitting your body. So it would still hurt quite a bit if you got hit by a tail tip of a diplodocid, but we're not quite sure if it was that fast to create a crack. But I mean, even so, defense might be an option, but that kind of communication system or tactile organ might be an option too. That's a bit more difficult to prove or disprove, because we can't look at those animals anymore. But yeah, I think what we need to remember there is this thing that parts of your body can have more than a single function.
A lot of what we do is kind of trying to take the cone of uncertainty and make it as small as possible. And so, like with biomechanics or feeding or whatever we're trying to do, there's a lot of just stuff that, because we can't observe it, we're never going to know, but we can try to narrow the range of things as much as possible. And again, think about the idea that one purpose does not necessarily negate another one.
And what role did diplodocids play in the ecosystem? Were they like modern elephants of their time, or just like something entirely different?
I think you can to a certain extent compare them to elephants, in the sense that at adult size, and especially in herds, they're probably largely impossible to tackle for a singular predator. The big difference, of course, is that dinosaurs lay eggs, and sauropods lay lots of eggs. And out of those eggs come very tiny sauropods. And those tiny sauropods form a very vital function in the food web, in that they are the perfect lunch for predators, as they are very small, very dumb, not that quick, so you can easily tackle them. So yeah, throughout their ontogeny, so their growth, they fulfill different functions within the ecosystem.
Yeah, but maybe similar to an elephant. We're not sure about this. We know there's been research that sauropods, and in this case some diplodocoids, may have been able to rear up. So it's possible if they were rearing up to either feed in trees, they may have occasionally knocked down trees as well. But I don't know if we have all the evidence for them knocking down trees like elephants do on the savannah today. But we do have some biomechanical models that show they could at least rear up on their back legs to reach high occasionally into the trees. But it is difficult to make sometimes a one-to-one comparison, like our diplodocoids, the elephants of the Jurassic. They were large animals, and they certainly had an important role to play in the ecosystem, but we're also still learning a lot of what that role was and what functions did they play, and the fact that, maybe similar but also different from the African savanna, they are coexisting with, in this case, we have stegosaurs and chylosaurs and other ornithopods that we're also trying to, on the large scale, like Dr. Whitlock talked about, trying to figure out how they all come together and, in this case, make up the ecosystem or ecosystems that we see, especially in late Jurassic North America when the Morrison Formation was deposited.
And how did diplodocids grow to that enormous size that they are? Sauropods in general are so famous for?
Well, they did it really fast. Late 90s, Christy Curry Rogers published a study using longbone histology that put a rate somewhere around the same rate as a gray whale. So they were growing, they were packing on a lot of pounds every year. They were doing it with not necessarily great material. A lot of roughage is pretty low calorie. But one of the things that we've been able to tell from a handful of really nice juvenile skulls that do exist is that there was probably some sort of age-related shift in what they were eating. So when they were young and growing really quickly, they're seemingly more fit for eating particular kinds of plants or particular parts of plants that are highly nutritious. Going to be more calorie for the bang, basically. And as they kind of age into being immense, right? Even small diplodocoids are really big. Being able to subsist more on roughage and just kind of getting maintenance calories, and eating a lot, right? Getting a lot of roughage in, but being able to tolerate lower calorie things. Being big has a lot of advantages in terms of being able to digest plant material. You have a really large volume to surface area ratio, so you generate a lot of heat, which is going to be positive for things that like fermentation processes and things like that. You have a lot of room for a big gut, so you can really break down things like cellulose, which is kind of the main barrier for mammals in getting calories out of plants. We can't really break down the cell walls. But if you have a fermentation vat or a large gut, you can do those kinds of things, but that requires a large body. And in sauropods would have had, all of those things at full size. And so it was kind of more of a doing one thing when you're little and transitioning and doing a different thing when you're an adult, because you have different caloric requirements and different capacities to break those things down.
And within that, do you think they were social creatures, or were they just kind of dumb and happened to live together?
There are trackways that demonstrate or appear to demonstrate herding behavior. At least during migration seasons, things like that. It's hard to say outside of that kind of evidence, but we do have some evidence for it. It would surprise me if we didn't see crash behavior in hatchlings, just because safety in numbers is a thing, right? And they're little and dumb and slow and delicious. And so, like schooling fish and things like that do the same thing. So it would surprise me if a method that we see in so many other small, delicious things would not have applied there as well. So probably at least at some point in their life, and probably at least at some point in their adult life, at least temporarily.
And how might climate or environment influence their evolution?
Probably a lot. We don't know how. The thing is, we have windows into their evolution, but those are very restricted in space and in time. So we have a very good understanding of the Morrison formation diversity. We have a good image or a window in the late Jurassic of Tanzania in Teneguru, and some for Rhybachisaurus it's pretty good in the Cretaceous in South America, but to really understand how biodiversity or the diversity of this clade evolved and how that relates to climate, you would really have to be able to connect all these single windows and follow them through time. And that's still kind of difficult, I think.
And what unanswered questions about the Diplodocids are you most excited to explore?
All of them.
Yeah.
The more you get into it, the more you realize that you know a little bit, and there's way more that you don't know. And trying to find the methodology to approach an answer, I think, to me, is the most interesting part of the whole thing. Is trying to figure out how to solve a problem that is, on the face of it, pretty intractable, because we've only got so much material. The material that we've got is only in such condition as it is, but we have this desire, there's this spirit of generalized passion for understanding dinosaurs in general, and having to try to kind of find scientific ways, repeatable, logical, good ways to answer those questions, I think is really interesting.
And you gonna say something?
Oh, well, to single out one of these issues that John was mentioning, I fully agree with John, but one of the things that I think will be interesting to see is that recently a early Cretaceous Southeast Asian possible Dicreosaurid has popped up, and it may be closely related to a Chinese species from the Middle Jurassic, because it looks quite similar to me from the pictures that I have seen, at least. And I'm really wondering how the evolutionary relationships are there and where did they come from, and if there is maybe an endemic group to Asia of this particular group of the Creosaurids, or maybe it's its own thing. Maybe when we have enough specimens from that area, we may feel that it's not a diplodocoid at all.
Or I think some specific questions I'm definitely interested in hopefully exploring and seeing explored in the future. For instance, what does the origin and the ancestral biogeographical story of diplodocoids look like, especially with what's happening in the Middle Jurassic? I also think it'd be interesting to explore their extinction. Why did the last of the diplodocoids go extinct? It seems some of them are going extinct pretty close to the Cretaceous thermal maximum, a time when the Earth geologically warms up, and then we see a lot of terrestrial clades go extinct. So is it related to that, or were they going extinct for different reasons? I'd say a last question I'm pretty interested in is Apatosaurinae right now. That specific clade is endemic to North America. We've only found, or we think we only have North American apatosaurines. So was that clade only restricted to North America? How did they evolve? Also, why did they go extinct? But are we going to maybe find European or African apatosaurines in the future?
Because we have, specifically looking towards the Jurassic of that, we do have European species of a lot of Jurassic species. So I would be very surprised if Apatosaurus was only in North America.
In the early 2000s, there was material that was thought originally, that was Portuguese, that was originally tied to Apatosaurus that has subsequently fallen somewhat out of favor from that. But there's certainly ecosystems in Iberia that are coeval, that are otherwise really similar, but we don't see the taxa there. So that is a really interesting question to try to figure out why just here,
Do y'all have any speculation on what that could be?
Blind luck. That's the other thing that's hard to do, to kind of get your head around doing this kind of work, is that sometimes stuff just happened and there wasn't like a reason for it. And we spend a lot of time looking for a reason, or we spend a lot of time thinking about, why was this particular thing here, or why did this remain? And sometimes it's just like, having 7 cervical vertebrae in mammals. Sometimes it's just because you don't get cancer if you have 7, and you have cancer if you have 8, Some of these weird things show up, weird things that keep things from going different places. Rivers will stop birds from migrating. Elephants don't like to cross roads. I mean, there's weird things that stop migration of animals today. To say nothing of what might have stopped the migration of a sauropod or something like that in the past.
And I mean, especially Apatosaurus, because that could be some kind of event to where there is more separation there between those two places than we think.
Well, I mean, you have very closely related, or some even say same species of Stegosaurus in Portugal and North America. So there must have been a way for actually getting from one place to the other very close in time to what we have in the Morrison and in the Lourinhã Formation in Portugal. So yeah, the question with apatosaurines is difficult or is strange, but I don't know. Maybe they were just lazy and didn't like to wander.
Yeah, we have other sauropods there. It's just not those guys. It's weird.
And I mean, especially, I see more Jurassic stuff for Europe, primarily coming out of Iberia, the Iberian Peninsula, with Portugal and Spain. I doubt there would not be Jurassic stuff in other places. I think I said that right. I'm sure there's Jurassic stuff in other places in Europe. That's an easier way of saying that. But why is Iberia kind of that centralized?
It was terrestrial in a time that a lot of that part of the world wasn't. We have, obviously, the Jurassic comes from the Urus mountains in Germany, so obviously those sediments are being laid down, but a lot of that stuff is not terrestrial. A lot of that region either was near shore marine or underwater for big chunks of time, or was otherwise subsequently kind of altered. For example, there's Jurassic in the UK, but it's all kind of beaten up just because of the way that time has molded that part of the world post-Jurassic.
Yeah, also, I think it's a matter of how easily you can find things. So in Portugal, a lot of stuff is being found in the cliffs. Spain also has quite a few areas that are not as much inhabited as other areas in Germany, for example, or France or Switzerland, where you have Jurassic outcrop, or you could have Jurassic outcrops, but you don't because you have buildings on top or forests or stuff. So it's just impossible to find anything. Whereas in those places in Spain or in Portugal, you actually see them on the surface. And Iberia was it was still an island, but it was a much bigger island than whatever island you had in these more near marine or areas in Switzerland, Germany, France. So there's actually one very interesting place in Germany where you find dwarfed sauropods, and that's the hypothesis there is that these guys lived on an island, a small island, for a long enough time that they evolved into a very small sauropod. And in Spain or in Portugal, you still have huge animals there. So that really means that this island that there was there was big enough to support many big sauropods. And also it was further to the west, so closer to North America. So I guess if anything would move around and there was some passage somewhere, North America and Iberia, that would have been the closest route geographically.
And I could have done this earlier when you put that link in there. Now we're all smushed to the side there, but this is the website, the donation page. If y'all are wondering what it looks like, this is what you see when you open it. You have a lot of information that has been slightly covered a little less in depth here. I would probably say I'd have to go over this and read it, but if y'all are interested, it's right there, and I'll link it in the description. And if you follow me on Instagram, I'll make a post about it, or make a post on YouTube too. You'll see it. It's somewhere. You can find it. But do y'all want to say anything about this? Any final things about this?
Yeah, I just want to quickly say once again, thank you to everyone who has donated or shared the campaign already. We really appreciate everyone's help with crowdfunding to help pay this APC. So thank you.
And I mean, if that's that, does anybody have any final words or final messages or final anythings?
Just kind of echoing the same thing. It's been amazing to see how many people have chosen to help out with this in one way or another. There's a lot of backers, a lot of people sharing, a lot of people talking about it. Makes you feel good, makes you feel like you're doing something interesting, makes you feel like you're doing something people care about, which is not always the case. So yeah, I think we all really, really kind of appreciate that in a tremendous way. With so many people in just a few days so far, it's been really incredible.
And
Yep, nothing to add there.
Thank you to you as well, Eric, for having us on to talk about our campaign.
Of course. And with that, if there are no any further words, we can wrap it up. But
Right. Thanks.
Thanks for having us on.
thank you all for coming on, and thank everybody for listening and watching, and or watching, depending on what platform you're I'm your host, Eric Crawford. This has been Prehistoric Life Podcast. Remember, keep it prehistoric. Bye.